Привit, moi druzy. Hello, my friends. Welcome. Today is day 345. Today, I want to talk about perspectives and perspectives in the conflict. Yesterday in class, we were talking about how, not all perspectives are equal. Like, we like to think that they are, but some perspectives are better than others. And it's hard for us to admit, but to not admit that would be to say that the Ukrainians' perspective is equally as valid as Putin's, or vice versa. And it's not. Some are of greater worth and some are damnable. Okay, so that's how I want to approach what we're about to talk about here. So we'll talk about perspectives like the Russian people's perspective that I talked about yesterday, American hawks, and we talked about how conservatives see things as opposed to liberals, and there are hawks particularly Republicans that are hawks that are just as supportive of Ukrainians as any liberals that you'll see. Zelenskyy will talk about his perspective, Putin's perspective, the EU leaders' perspective, the people of Lithuania. We'll talk about John Bolton, a former U.S. security advisor, and the perspective of Air Force General Minihan, who just said something fairly controversial. And finally, we'll talk about my new book because you're going to want to see it. Okay. So I'm going to start here with this viewer comment yesterday. Yesterday I talked about Trump, who said, if I was president, the Russia-Ukraine war would never have happened. So this viewer said, I'm left-wing, not extremist, but left. And I want to add that from a German perspective, the American left, or Democrats, pretty much resemble the conservative right wing here. They're very far to the left compared to where America is, or we're very far to the right compared to where they are. Republicans seem to be what is regarded as extremist right here. Therefore, I was also a bit confused when I got to know that you're a Republican. It's just a worldview, which is super hard for me to wrap my head around. Would love to actually get to know your political mindset and how an obviously smart and empathetic person like you comes to be a Republican. I hope this doesn't sound offending. It doesn't. It's not my intention to offend. If it is, I'm sorry. No worries. But as you said, we're all here for a common cause, and I appreciate your work regardless of politics. Thank you. Okay, so here's the thing. If you only understand or only know a caricature of somebody that holds a particular position, it is hard to understand them. When you mix with people who are of a different mindset, like I know people of a different political persuasion or hold other values and whatever, and I'm fine with agreeing that you think I'm wrong and I think you're wrong about these things, but we can get to know each other and get to understand each other. And from my worldview, from my perspective, you're made in the image of God just like I am, and you're of inestimable value and worth. And so I should listen to what you have to say. Now, if that's not your experience with Christians, as I am, or conservatives, as I am, then you're mixing with not real Christian conservatives. Okay, because this is how pretty much everyone that I know and mix with, I mean, as far as in my kind of political camp, thinks. And so if that's unfamiliar to you, you got to get out more and get to know people of that persuasion. And that works the other way around. Get to know them and you'll understand them, and don't create a straw man or set up a character. Now, with that being said, let's talk about multiple perspectives or different ways that people are seeing what's going on. Because you can learn things from them even if you radically disagree with them. You can learn how they understand things or how they think. So even you can learn from Putin, not that you agree with Putin, but you can learn from him how he thinks so that you can anticipate where he's going. Okay, so yesterday I talked about this article. This was the people of Russia, Europe's last empire, and they were talking about how beaten down, how apathetic they were, the lack of empathy that they had for Ukrainians and what they're going through. They got out of Russia, and I said, "Great, get out of Russia, okay? Bleed them. If 1 million of you leave, it hurts the economy. I'm glad for that. I would love you to protest, but I know that you're not going to because your mentality is just not there, generally speaking. And so I don't expect more from you than what I can practically expect, but I know that that's their mentality. And with that being said, I'm glad that they're doing something of not fighting and not contributing to the economy and getting out. Now, if they were stirring up trouble somewhere as a fifth column in a different country, I'd have a different perspective about this. But that's generally not what they do because they tend to be apathetic and apolitical for the most part. So that's their perspective. On the other side, you have American hawks in the United States. This is Foreign Affairs Magazine. How to get a breakthrough in Ukraine? Give them more. Give them everything that you can possibly give them so that they can take the fight to the other side. That's the idea. I saw this a couple of days ago. I read it, but I put it aside because it didn't flow with what we were talking about. But that's right. Give them more. Give them. Ukraine's doing so well in part thanks to a unified Western response, the article said. And when you get down to the very bottom of the article, the conclusion was, well, pretty simple. As long as Russian soldiers occupy their country, Ukrainians are going to fight. That's their perspective. They're going to fight in the same way that if somebody broke into my house and was threatening my children, I'm going to fight until my last breath. This key insight about the Ukrainian mentality today leads to the obvious policy recommendation for the West: help Ukraine win as fast as possible. Right. But that's a perspective that I agree with, not necessarily a perspective that others agree with. It's Zelensky's perspective, right? We must do everything that we can so that next year we'll be able to pray with thanks for the obtained salvation from evil. He's talking to the United States National Prayer Breakfast and saying that. But yeah, that's his perspective. It's certainly not Putin's perspective. Putin has a very different perspective, and it's not one that I can say there's any moral equivalence to. I think Putin's perspective is evil, damnable, it's lies, it's built on a false foundation. Russian officials are continuing efforts to frame the war in Ukraine as an existential threat to Russian audiences in order to set information conditions for a protracted war, this is according to the ISW, for domestic support and continued military operations. Remember when it was nothing to see here, it's just a special military operation, and if you call it a war, you can go to jail? But now they're changing their tune because they have to. Putin falsely accused the collective West of forcing Russia to repel its aggression and remarked that Russia is once again being threatened with German Leopard tanks that are going to fight Russia on the soil of Ukraine with the hands of Hitler's descendants. Okay, where did he say that? He said that yesterday. He said this 80 years on, we are facing German tanks again. So we're commemorating the Battle of Stalingrad. And so he's using that as a pretext to show how this is an existential threat to Russia when it's really not. They could leave Ukraine at any time. They could, if they physically moved off of Ukraine's soil, Ukraine's not bothering them. Okay? Vladimir Putin has compared Russia's invasion to Ukraine to the fight against Nazi Germany. It's unbelievable but true, he said. Well, it is believable. It is untrue. It got it kind of backwards. It's unbelievable but true, he said. We are again being threatened by German Leopard tanks. Not exactly. It's a little different this time, right? Mr. Putin was in Volgograd to mark the anniversary of the end of World War II's Battle of Stalingrad, which saw the Soviet army capture nearly 91,000 German troops in a major turning point of the war. And it was a major turning point of the war. The city was temporarily renamed Stalingrad for the day to mark the anniversary, and earlier this week, a new bust of former Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was unveiled. Stalin was a mass murderer. But the Russians seem to be okay with that. They seem to like him. Look, excess mortality in the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, right? Let's look down a little bit and see how many people he killed. In 2011, after assessing 20 years of historical research in Eastern European archives, American historian Timothy Snyder stated that Stalin deliberately killed about 6 million, which rose to 9 million if foreseeable deaths arising from policies are taken into account. Where did he kill them? Well, in the Great Purge, in the Gulag, in Soviet deportations, in the Holodomor, right? In Ukraine, Kazakhstan famine, right? There's all kinds of ways that he killed all kinds of people, and they're putting a bust of him. He doesn't deserve. He deserves a bust of him being beaten and what, but not honored. But that's the worldview. That's the mentality. That's the perspective that this guy comes with. Okay, so his remarks. The Russian leader made comments during a ceremony to mark the 80th anniversary. Unbelievable but true, we just said, once again threatened with German Leopard tanks. And again, once seeking to battle Russia in Ukraine with the help of Hitler's followers, the Banderites. Right, so he's now tying them, the Ukrainians, as if they're somehow Hitler's followers. The Ukrainians aren't Hitler's followers. Look, you know, I thought about this earlier, and I thought, it's fascinating that Putin is claiming they're Nazis. In World War II, the Nazis were saying, we're Nazis, right? Right now, nobody's saying we're Nazis. Only Putin is saying that as a pretext in order to do what he's doing. But see, here's what the Nazis said. This is Joseph Goebbels. I studied the Nazis in my master's thesis. It was the devolution of human life in Nazi Germany, and with years attached to the title. Now, the devolution of human life traced the policy of how people can become legally non-people and then be destroyed. And I read Goebbels' diaries in the process. Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister, and he said essentially, and he said this in various ways, right? I'm going to show you two variations of it. If you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you even come to believe it yourself. Look, what Putin is doing is more Nazi than anything that the Ukrainians are actually doing or embracing, or right, like, okay, Bandera, he was mixed up with the Nazis. I get that. He was valued by the Ukrainians not because of the Nazi thing, but because he was for Ukrainian freedom, Ukrainian existence as its own nation. That's why they respect him. Okay? That's the primary or only reason. Now, going back to Goebbels, this is from the Jewish Virtual Library. Here's a longer quote by Goebbels. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. A lie can be maintained for only such a time as the state can shield the people from political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. Now look what's going on in Russia. Think of what Goebbels just said, the Nazi propaganda minister, and what he just said, and what Russia's actually doing in clamping down on freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to actually, like, the media is being shut down. You go to jail if you hold up a blank sign at a protest, right? I mean, think about what's actually going on. It thus becomes virtually important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Well, the state that lies, like what's going on in Russia. So if you understand that, this is why I show you Pravda and RT, because I'm trying to expose these lies. Because people are buying these lies. They're like, it's being exported, and then it's being exported, repackaged into another article, and then somehow it gets into the stream of people that you and I know that mix with, that they're saying, well, those Ukrainians, they're all Nazis. What? Okay, so Medvedev, Ukraine as a state to be devastated, go bankrupt, and be turned into a colony. I think what he's saying is that they're going to become a colony, a vassal state of the West. I don't think that's what's going to happen in practicality, but I think if Zelenskyy had a choice of being for the, beholden to the West or beholden to Russia, and Russia's not going to be kind about what kind of colony they would be, the West wants to bring them into union. Like, the West wants to work with them and incorporate them into the fabric of who they are. It's a very different experience. Now, generally, you can tell if a country is good by whether people are trying to get into it or get out of it. If they're trying to get into the country, good. If they're trying to get out of the country, bad, right? So it's the same kind of principle here. What kind of colony would they be if they're involved with the West, or if they're involved in well, from Russia? Okay? EU leaders are there right now, colonizing, right? What are they doing? Well, there will be no let up in our resolve. We will also support you every step of the way in your journey to the EU. Right? They're there trying to help them integrate into the system. And how are they integrating into the system? What happened all last week or this past week? Your determination to join the EU is impressive. I'm comforted to see that your anti-corruption bodies are on alert and effective in detecting corruption cases. I also am commending you on reacting so rapidly at the political level to make sure that the fight against corruption is delivering tangible results and is further stepped up. Look, fighting corruption is just a moral good. It's just a good thing. And this is what's bad according to Dmitry Medvedev. Okay, let's think about this from another perspective. Lithuanians. I love Lithuania. I've been there a few times. And in fact, I have the Vytis, the symbol of Lithuania. It's the knight on a horseback with a sword in his hand, driving the invader from their lands. That's what the Vytis is. And they set an absolute record worldwide. Lithuanians raised over €1 million for radars for Ukraine in 1 hour. Like Lithuania is this tiny country. It's the size of West Virginia, and they have been such a stalwart supporter. But that's because their perspective is they remember what it was like when the Soviets dominated them, and they don't want to go back to that, and they don't want to be what happens to Ukraine either. Another perspective, John Bolton. John Bolton is a Republican. He's a hawk. He was the former U.S. National Security Advisor, and he made the claim during a call with a notorious Russian prankster. Like he thought that he was speaking to former President Poroshenko, right? And he said, "To me, the important thing is that we continue to push the Russian military, not that we fold." Like he wasn't being hypocritical. He wasn't saying, "Yeah, well, maybe we'll make some deal behind closed doors." No, and they're presenting this in RT, like, "Haha, we tricked them." Well, here's what he actually said, and I agree.
To me, the important thing is to continue to push the Russians militarily. I think this is a winnable war.
Yep.
And to stop efforts by whether it's the French or the Germans or whoever it might be to try and negotiate with the Russians. And the Finnish prime minister was asked a couple of weeks ago, "How does this end in Ukraine? How does it end?" And she said, "How does it end? It ends when the Russian troops leave Ukraine." That's how.
That's right. When the Russian troops leave Ukraine, that's how it ends. Okay, let me shift gears and talk about one more perspective. And this wasn't about Ukraine, but it was about the broader international what's going on. This is Air Force General making some waves, saying war with China is right around the corner. General Mike Minihan, head of Air Mobility Command, he's I think a 4-star general, and he made some big waves with this, saying, "Look, airmen, you need to be unrepentingly lethal. My gut tells me we will fight China in 2025." Minihan predicted that Chinese President Xi is now in his 3rd term, and he'll take advantage of the 2024 presidential elections in Taiwan and the U.S. to cause trouble. Now, somebody was asking me about this yesterday, one of my students, and I was saying, well, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Now, he sees things that I don't see, so I'm admitting that right up front. But I will tell you, what happens in Ukraine is important because that is going to determine for Xi what Xi should do. If Putin can just roll over Ukraine and take what he wants, Xi's going to try to take Taiwan, embroil us in a larger conflict. If Putin gets checked here, though, and the world's resolve stays fixed, I don't think Xi's going to be nearly as antsy. I can't predict the future. My crystal ball is murky, but I think the percent chance that he is going to want to do that if Putin is checked drops dramatically. And that's why one of the reasons, not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons why Ukraine's important. It's important because it's wrong for them to go, for the Russians to go in and violate Ukraine. But it's also important because there's a broader context. And Zelenskyy has pointed this out again and again. The fight in Ukraine is the world's fight. It's just localized to Ukraine right now. Okay, if you want to read more about Zelenskyy and see some of my perspective about him, you can see my book. It's here, free on Kindle Unlimited. You can also see my new book. My new book, well, you might want to think about this one. It's a complete collection of Vladimir Putin's truth about Ukraine. Okay, so in this book, I will cover how NATO caused the war in Ukraine, how NATO sent 10,000 troops to Ukraine, how Crimea joined Russia illegally, how the Nazis rule in Ukraine, how the West staged a coup to overthrow the pro-Russian Ukrainian government in 2014, how Russian-speaking residents of Donbass have been subjected to genocide, how Ukrainian officials have purchased multi-million-dollar properties in Switzerland, definitive proof that the Azov Battalion are white supremacist Nazis, how the U.S. set up biolabs in Ukraine and caused coronavirus, and how Ukraine conducted experiments and military personnel in order to access their tolerance to infectious diseases. All the points that Putin has been talking about are definitively proven here. Well, except it's not. It's once you get past the table of contents, it's just blank pages. But if you purchase this, every $2.99 book, about $2, which is what comes out of the book, will be donated to Ukrainian relief efforts. And so I was looking for a way that I could be supporting some kind of Ukrainian relief, and this is my contribution. It's a gag gift. So if you want to purchase that, I thank you in advance. And I'll leave the link below in every video. The link will be below from now on. If you like this video and you wish to support me, one of the best ways that you can do this is leave a thumbs up, like, subscribe, leave a comment, pass it along to a friend. If you want to support me personally, I thank those of you who have bought me a coffee, and thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.